all the wonderful people in this room, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. Molweni, good morning, Khemore, Sanborn. It is a privilege and an honor to open this distinguished event in the presence of so many eminent leaders and illustrious personalities. We are gathered here to participate in the launch of the inaugural Aziz Pahad Annual Peace, Security and Human Rights Dialogue, but also to celebrate his immense contribution to our struggle for freedom and his role in the diplomacy of a democratic South Africa. Ladies and gentlemen, today's launch coincides with the month in which we celebrate human rights on 21 March, and we view this quest for human rights for all as a lodestar of our deep commitment to constitutionalism and the rule of law that protects and promotes the rights of our citizens and the peoples of the world. And sometimes I think we need to repeat that a lot to the world in some quarters where now this is being challenged. Our Constitution is a creation of our quest for human dignity and freedom that was only possible because of a deep commitment to build a peaceful, cohesive, and united society. The presence of so many international partners and friends here today is a testament to the international solidarity that helped shape our freedom experience. So it's really an honor and privilege that we have to create this, or our leaders have to create this platform today, the Aziz Pahad Peace, Security and Human Rights Dialogue, which we hope will become the premier DERCO engagement to bring together political figures, civil society, academia, and elders to interrogate current challenges and shared experiences that achieve a better South Africa, a better Africa, and a better world. We always remember DM Pahad fondly. He was our father, our mentor, and a leader for the Diplomatic Academy in particular. We will always remember him bantering with his, we could call friends and comrades, Ambassador Nchapo, Ambassador Nene, but also in terms of those elders who had wisdom, who will always support us in our training of our programs. I recall here former Professor Mufamadi. Sikni Mufamadi was part of that group. He was always smiling. This is DM Pahad. And he will always give you a hug when he meets you. But he will also teach you. And he will ask, where are you now? What are you doing? And then he will start teaching you about what's happening in that country and what happened some years ago, which is so important for you to know if you're working with that country. So he was always a teacher. Colleagues, remember former Deputy Minister Pahad as the embodiment of the exercise of diplomacy and foreign policy. He believed that diplomacy should be lived experiences of citizens, as the delivery of water, electricity, social grants, and other basic services in our society. For him, foreign policy was also a deeply personal and important contribution to democratic South Africa's aspirations to improve the lives of millions of citizens. He also had led a discussion on Fridays where, I think in the Union Building, off the record, where they will all meet as leaders and everybody else to talk about the politics informally, to say what's happening in the world. And we used to learn a lot when we hear what happens off the record discussions. And I must say that, Excellencies, we keep on reminded that we need those off the record discussions on Friday evenings this time around, and also to teach the next generations. Others reflect that we often read about the necessity for servant leadership, which is putting the well-being of the greater collective and their needs first. This is the kind of leadership and diplomacy of the Aziz Pahad espoused through his actions and words. In the final analysis, Deputy Minister Pahad was a realist with a deep and intuitive understanding of global power dynamics and how this would impact on domestic realities. He loved his country and its people unreservedly. And I must say that I've got the honor to be standing here today because our DG could not be here. So with those few words, I open this engagement, and thank you very much. At this point, I'm going to call Ambassador Seba, Ambassador of Norway, to say a few words, please. Thank you.
To turn this stuff on. Okay. Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much, Program Director, Ambassador Lomo. Dear former President, His Excellency Thabo Mbeki, Minister Lamola, Deputy Minister Botes, Professor Pahad and my dear friend Ambassador Slapo over there. It's an honor to stand here on behalf of Norway to participate in this inaugural Aziz Pahad Annual Peace, Security and Human Rights Dialogue. This dialogue is a component of the flagship program that the Embassy and DIRCO are jointly advancing to strengthen mediation and negotiation effort on the continent on behalf of our respective countries. So where do we come from? Well, just a few words about that. Our current, very close bilateral partnership started in the early 1960s. Oliver Tambo met our Prime Minister in Oslo in 1962. Norwegian support to the liberation struggle became official policy, as it was official policy in the other Nordic countries. After the triumph of democracy and a new dispensation, President Mandela set out the direction for our bilateral partnership in 1998 during a visit of our King, state visit, and I quote from President Mandela: "Now that South Africa has achieved its freedom, we shall always remember Norway's example of extending to the whole world the values of a caring society. We commit ourselves to working with Norway for peace, democracy and equitable international relations." End of quote. Today's event is yet another sign of our mutual commitment to follow up on President Mandela's words, words that also late Deputy Minister Pahad certainly had on his mind. Aziz Pahad was a frequent guest at the residence of the Norwegian ambassadors in Pretoria over many years. Many of my predecessors have fond memories of his insight, his humor and his helpful hand. He also visited Norway several times. As the program director mentioned, it was quite often a trio coming to the residence of Ambassador Slapo, late Ambassador George Nene, and Aziz Pahad. So there is a great deal of fond memories of Aziz Pahad. Unfortunately, I came too late to meet with him. We have a bilateral legacy that is deeply rooted in diplomacy and commitment to peace and justice. Recently, our common work to support the implementation of United Nations Security Council Resolution 1325 on women, peace and security have been one focus area. We have also worked together and continue to work together in countries like Sudan and South Sudan, trying to assist in whatever way we can, both of us. Our cooperation has always been part of a broader partnership in the multilateral sphere as well, particularly at the United Nations. We are honored to be invited as a guest country by the South African G20 presidency. South Africa is doing a great job, despite many challenges. It is surprising and disappointing to see some countries questioning the focus on the Sustainable Development Goals and the fight for women's rights. Norway and so many other countries inside and outside G20 fully support South Africa's work and your priorities as the chair of the G20. In a geopolitical shifting landscape, we must work against might is right attitude, that the powerful can take and do whatever they want. The international community has a compass, or we can call it a rule book, designed to prevent conflict. It doesn't solve all problems, but it's a good starting point. It's called international humanitarian law, It's called international law. It includes the UN Charter and international human rights. These principles have to be applied in a consistent manner. After Hamas' brutal terror attack on Israeli citizens, Israel had a right to defend itself, but that exercise of power is constrained by international law. All parties need to take active action to protect civilians and to allow for humanitarian access in conflict areas. That did not happen. With the support of South Africa and 136 countries in the UN General Assembly, we send a powerful message referring Israel to the International Court of Justice just before Christmas. It is unacceptable for Israel to block the delivery of humanitarian assistance to Palestinians living under occupation. Norway emphasizes that international courts are there to be used, something South Africa is doing in their own case against Israel's war in Palestine in the International Court of Justice. Those countries who disagree with South Africa can present their views in the court in Hague. On this continent, the sovereignty and territorial integrity of states, including the Democratic Republic of Congo, must be respected. In the war in Europe, the aggressor Russia is our neighboring country. Russia, with their unprovoked attack on Ukraine, has taken Europe back to the darkest hours of the last century, when small countries like Norway was but a piece on a chessboard. We were occupied by Nazi Germany during the Second World War. The UN Charter was made to avoid such might is right attitude and new wars of this kind. The fundamental principle of international law obviously also apply in another part of Norway's neighborhood, the Arctic. Greenland is part of the Kingdom of Denmark. In today's world, we need multilateralism more than ever, and we need reformed multilateral institutions that reflect the world of today, not the world of 1945. We are deeply honored that DIRCO has chosen Norway as a partner in this important initiative, which will now become an annual event. We will look forward to working together to ensure that this platform continues to inspire meaningful discussions and impactful actions for years to come. In conclusion, I want to come back to former Deputy Minister Aziz Pahad, his principled role as a freedom fighter, diplomat and intellectual who dedicated his life to the struggle against apartheid. He also showed how a country emerging from oppression can use its history to champion global peace and cooperation. For him, the slogan would not be what we often hear today, which is "me first." No, for him, a slogan would probably be more like "stronger together," and that philosophy was key during his lifetime. It is even more important in today's world. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. Let me also recognize Deputy Minister Olomisa and all other excellencies who I might have forgotten to acknowledge in this room. At this point in the program, we've got Madam Professor Pahad. Thank you.
Thank you. President Mbeki was going to come around asking each and every one of you whether you had a pair of spectacles to lend me if they didn't find my spectacles, which I dropped somewhere between the venue I was sitting in coming here, so I'm very glad that I've got my own spectacles. Program Director, Minister of International Relations and Cooperation, Honorable Lamola, former President of the Republic, His Excellency President Thabo Mbeki and Sis Zanele, Deputy Minister of International Relations and Cooperation, Mr. Alvin Botes, Ambassador of Norway, His Excellency Saita, Ambassadors and High Commissioners past and present. I also would like to acknowledge the ministers, former ministers present here today, particularly pleased to see Minister Nkosazana Zuma, with whom Aziz shared many, many adventures together. Comrade Ambassador Vulile Nhlapo, members of the DIRCO community and other dignitaries. And I would like to acknowledge my sister-in-law, Meg Pahad, the wife of late Minister Aziz Pahad, Aziz's brother. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, and on this particular day, happy Eid Mubarak to those celebrating. On behalf of the Pahad family, I wish to thank Minister Lamola and DIRCO for the special honor bestowed upon my late husband, Aziz Pahad, by hosting this annual dialogue in his name and in recognition of his life and legacy. As we mark Human Rights Day, may I also take this opportunity to pay tribute to all the men, women, and youth who paid the ultimate price for the freedoms we enjoy today. As Aziz would have reminded us, peace, security, and human rights are values not simply bestowed upon us, but are the products of our shared responsibility and collective action. And as we celebrate Eid today, let us also remind ourselves that Eid is a time to reflect on the past and look forward to the future with hope, peace, and happiness. I would like to extend a word of appreciation to President Mbeki and to other distinguished speakers for so generously taking the time to participate in today's inaugural dialogue. I'm particularly delighted to see included in the program is an intern at DIRCO. Aziz was passionate about nurturing the next generation of diplomats. He would often remind the young diplomats that a good diplomat is one who's willing to listen to different perspectives, that challenges one's own assumptions, and is able to defend his or her own position with intellectual vigor and concrete facts. Diplomacy, he wrote, requires thinking outside the box and being able to predict and analyze potential developments and present options to enable governments to respond timelessly and to even unforeseen developments. Program Director, much has happened in our world since Aziz's passing on the 27th of September 2023. The world as we know it has become even more fragile, troubled, and disruptive. With the events of the past 2 months, a stark reminder that humanity is confronting unprecedented uncertainty and a dangerous world order that is constantly changing. If Aziz were with us today, he would have told us that these are not unforeseen developments. On the contrary, the signs were all there, that we should have anticipated the events of late and been prepared. He was no soothsayer, but he was an astute politician and diplomat par excellence, who understood all too well that events do not take place in a vacuum, but are incubated, molded, and given shape and effect by policies and decisions taken in the annals of time by groups and nations that have appointed themselves as the custodians of the international system. He understood that the international relations environment had become more complex, fragmented, and divisive, and that today Africa and the world is facing one of its greatest existential crises. He warned us about the growing threats to regional and international peace and security, the proliferation of weapons of mass destruction, the growth of populist political and economic nationalism and anti-democratic tendencies, the disregard of international law with impunity, the fundamental weakening of multilateral institutions, and the growing influence of the military-industrial complex. He warned us about NATO's expansion and the threat of war in Europe, and the rise of neo-fascist organizations and governments in Europe. In Asia, he warned about growing right-wing religious nationalism. In Arab countries, religious fundamentalism and extremism. In Latin America, increasing regime change and the rise of right-wing and neo-fascist military leaders and governments. And in Africa, growing extremism, terrorism, and conflicts. He remained steadfast in his assertion that Israel will never commit to a negotiated two-stage solution, and that it would continue to act with impunity with the backing of the US and some Western and some Arab countries. He realized the importance of better understanding the economic, political, and military rise of Russia and China. He understood the power of perception management and the power of fake news to deliberately undermine the truth. During the first Trump presidency, Aziz warned that the US administration's America First policies, Trump's take it or leave it tactics in renegotiating all US trade agreements and other discussions, the global trade war, even against US historical allies in NATO and the G7, will destroy the liberal world order imposed after the Second World War. And he challenged us to think about what the consequences will be. He cautioned us about the events of January the 8th, 2021, when thousands of neo-fascists stormed the Capitol Hill and entered the US citadel of power and symbol of democracy, and left the US and the rest of the world stunned and in search of answers. He believed we will experience many such incidents globally, including in the US and in other developed and developing countries. On recent events, he would have given a nod to the current peace talks between Russia and Ukraine, but would have cautioned us never to be complacent about US motives. He would have understood the despair and anguish of the families of the Israeli hostages and urged for a safe return of all the remaining hostages. But he would not have hesitated in condemning the State of Israel's deliberate and systematic destruction and displacement of the Palestinian people. But Program Director Aziz was a seasoned diplomat who understood all too well that diplomacy requires that we talk to both friend and foe, and that the only guarantee of peace, security, and human rights is when nations dialogue and engage constructively with one another. He believed in the world we live in now, we must expect and anticipate constant challenges of changing alliances and contradictory policies. It cannot be an absolute black and white or business as usual approach. Program Director, everything I've mentioned was drawn from Aziz's writings and speeches. This begs the question, why are we so surprised by the current global upheavals? What could we have done differently, and could we have been better prepared? But most importantly, what Aziz would be asking is, what is to be done? The question to this last answer, the answer to this last question is perhaps best contained in a speech delivered by Aziz on the 30th of April 2021 on acceptance of an honorary doctorate from the University of Pretoria. This is what he had to say, and I quote, "Now more than ever, the world is in need of true leadership to inspire a united and decisive global response to the threats and challenges that face us all. Throughout history, there are examples of moments of unprecedented crisis that present threats to the very future of humanity. And humanity responded as a united and decisive force to defeat such threats. I truly believe that we live in such a time. That said, we would do well to remember at times like these that the human family remains bound together as never before, as communities of faith brought together by their mutual vulnerabilities and an abiding sense of solidarity, compassion, and interdependence. These have been the essential values that have guided South Africa's foreign policy since 1994, profoundly informed by a global landscape of grave asymmetry and deep inequality. Continue, I'm confident that given the challenges humanity faces, today's leadership, graduates, researchers, academics, and civil society will join thousands of other colleagues in Africa and the world to rebuild trust and defeat all tendencies to slip into arrogant unilateralism. Together, we can build a united, peaceful, and prosperous Africa and a better world." End quote. Program Director, Aziz was a tireless crusader for international peace and security and dedicated his life to the promotion of peace, security, justice, and international solidarity. His ideas and actions have consistently been dedicated to the core values and principles of building a better South Africa, a better Africa, and a better world. He would never surrender to tyranny, dictatorship, and oppression. He fought fiercely against apartheid and would have remained defiant against any nation and people that seeks to dominate another. But he would have recognized that in times of crisis, there is an opportunity for self-reflection and self-renewal and renewal of purpose. The world we live in today demands that we remain resilient in our aspirations, bound by a common purpose of a better life for all our people, and resolute in our commitment to developing a multipolar world and an equitable world order. Our best tribute to Aziz is to emulate in our lives and actions the principles, values, and ethics by which he lived. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam Prof. Pahad. Let me also at this point acknowledge Ma'am Zanele Mbeki and all the members of the family, and I can see Sis Thandi, Lujabe Rankwe there as well. Of course, I see all other leaders who have been here. We acknowledged and honored Sis Ma'am Zanele Mbeki last year when we were celebrating International Women's Day for the leadership and all the work he has done throughout history to empower and develop women. Thank you very much. Now, on the agenda, the next one is Ambassador Nhlapo, who's going to help by paying tribute to, who used to call DM Pahad Aziz. Thank you, Ambassador.
Thank you very much, Program Director. I was laughing because as I was passing, President Mbeki was saying good luck to me. And he confirmed what I feared, that I'm going to be in trouble. I must be careful about what I'm saying. Program Director, thank you very much, and thank you for the occasion and having invited me to share a bit on Aziz Pahad. President Mbeki, Comrade Tanjina, the Minister, Deputy Minister, Ambassador, thank you for reminding us about some of the occasions that we spared with you and Aziz Pahad and George. I see my former bosses, too many of them in this room, but I see particularly two of them sitting together. Ministers, welcome back to the house of Oliver Tambo. Deputy Minister Bantu Holomisa, I'm glad you are here and I understand why you are here and your aspirations too. Because you aspire to be the Dean of Deputy Ministers, like your Dean Aziz Pahad that we are celebrating today, because that's what you used to call him. And that's why when I heard that he had passed on, you're the first person I informed, precisely because I knew the relationship and respect, mutual respect that existed between the two of you. I thought I should just register that, but also say that I must be warned, I've been warned that I must not make any reference to unconstitutional takeover of power, because I might be misunderstood, to be directing myself to you. But that is the past, and you can't do that again. Sizanele, Mrs. Pahad, Senior, Comrade Mac, I see there's somebody there from Alexander Township called Wali Sorote. I think I must acknowledge you also. Before I run into trouble, I see the all ambassadors and high commissioners here and former ambassadors and officials in the Department of Foreign Affairs and DIRCO. I'm making that distinction deliberately because Aziz never served in the capacity of a deputy minister in DIRCO. It was only in Foreign Affairs. But he still regarded DIRCO as his home. He did not make any distinction despite the changes that brought about the name and the origin of what happened, which I am not allowed to talk about now. I'm honored to be alive and part of this ceremony to launch the Aziz Pahad Dialogue on Peace, Security and Human Rights. This is a most fitting tribute and memorialization of this great patriot, revolutionary intellectual, diplomat, thought leader, a mentor and friend to all, and in particular, the youth. I don't see them here, and I'm sure Aziz will be very angry to discover that they did not attend. I don't know why. Because those are the people he valued. more than the elders that are here today. This day marks the beginning of a dedicated reflection on the centrality of diplomacy in the prevention, management, and resolution of conflicts. The life and times of Comrade Aziz in this country's journey of mediation and negotiations as tools for the peaceful resolution of armed conflicts is a valid justification for lessons learned exercises. What are these lessons that we learned from this giant? I thought it was important to recall some of the lessons that we have learned from Comrade Aziz, because given the current approach towards the resolution of conflicts, he would have insisted that something seriously wrong is happening. This notion of peace through violence, with the only outcome being transactional and a deal for minerals at the expense of peace and justice. And in some cases, some of the agreements that we see would be a cause of concern for Aziz, because it will only be just agreement, just an agreement that would have been signed, when what should have been the outcome would have been a just agreement, because justice should be at the center of the outcome of any negotiation. He always emphasized on the importance of planning and preparation. During the stages, particular attention should be paid to the history and geographical location and causes of the conflict in order to make an informed and an objective analysis of the conflict dynamics and the understanding of the drivers of conflicts. We'd insist on a scientific approach towards that preparatory process. We'd emphasize the critical importance of appreciating that these processes must be intelligence-driven to be able to mitigate threats, but also to identify opportunities. Public diplomacy and communication strategy should also be one of the things that must be taken into consideration to ensure that whatever happens within that room, we are able to manage how you communicate with the people that are affected and all those who might have been interested. The importance of the identification of global, regional, national institutions and individuals who are active in dealing with a particular conflict. The interests of global and former colonial powers, because sometimes they become the chief spoilers in those processes, and in some cases they come in handy because they know better certain elements of what remains after the transfer of power during independence in cases of Africa. The importance of peace building in the restoration of the capacity of the state, the rule of law, and the rights and freedoms guaranteed by the Constitution. The building of an infrastructure for peace involving communities and their organized formations. I've just tried to recall the approach to what, at the practical level, informed our interventions in the continent and beyond, led by Aziz Pahad, under your guidance, Mr. President. On the observation of the principles and values guiding our actions, it was clear to all involved that there will be no compromise on his part. The leadership skills and deep knowledge of Aziz Pahad remain a precious gift he bequeathed to us. Thankfully, because of his meticulous note-taking and record-keeping, we have a rich database for developing manuals for the training of our diplomats. I would encourage our young diplomats to access this knowledge from our archives here at DIRCO. The classified documents containing submissions and reports must be made accessible to our academics, postgraduate students, researchers, and practitioners, so that we don't make mistakes that could have been done and corrected in the past. Allow me to recall the numerous interventions as testimony of evidence of the claims that I've just made. The decisions and program of action of the Transitional Subcommittee on International Relations of the Transitional Executive Council was by and large guided and inspired by the experience of Aziz Pahad, including even, as I mentioned, the programs that they had to embark, amongst others, visiting the OAU headquarters at the time to raise our flag as a signal of our commitment that at the end of our negotiations we will be part of the African family of nations. The decisions, the resolutions, then in Angola, at the time when there was an attempt to revive the Lusaka Agreement, Aziz Pahad led a three-aside engagement between ourselves, the Angolans, and the Americans in order to try and ensure that we can be able to work together in removing some of the obstacles to ensure that there is a seamless process in the work that was being done by Ambassador Kambari at the time, who was assigned by the United Nations Secretary General to deal with that conflict. Lesotho, the Kimberley process, Palestine, the Spear process and the envoys, Great Lakes region, Sudan, South Sudan, Côte d'Ivoire, Zaire, DRC, Comoros, Syria, Iraq, Libya, and others. I am mentioning these particular conflicts where Aziz Pahad led the delegations and the interventions of South Africa, precisely because today, when the names of these countries are mentioned, we all cringe, because it means that all the efforts that we have made somehow seems to have dissipated. And therefore it becomes difficult in the circumstances to say to Comrade Aziz and others that they must continue to rest in peace, because it cannot be possible. I selectively and deliberately mention these interventions as examples of the work of Aziz Pahad. I can further note that in all meetings and conferences related to these conflicts, we were ably led and represented by this doyen of our diplomacy. Mr. President, at a personal note, you'll forgive me to make this last remark directed towards you. Right until the first time I knew Aziz Pahad, until the time of his last days, You were always there with him, and you always made sure, particularly when he was not well, that all of us, when available, you would invite us to join you, to come and see you, to come and see him, so that we can keep him company. And that we did all the time. Unfortunately, we could not guarantee that he can be with us for long. But this is something that I think I must mention here, that it defines who you are. When Super Moloi and myself were in some hospital around Pretoria for 6 months, and doctors were preparing to write our death certificates, you were always there. You came several times to come and see us. I remember in the 4 medical institutions that I was in, you came 4 times. And all the time they kept on asking me, as they asked us with Super at the time, as to who we are. And we said we are just patients. And they went to Google us, and after that we were embarrassed. But it also helped to do what Aziz would have done. It was the time when the bombardment of Gaza was on steroids. And we were discussing, when we were normal, about what is happening. They overheard us talking about that. And all the time they will ask us for an update as to what is happening in Palestine. But thank you very much, Mr. President, for being there for all of us. And I hope you'll stay long to do it to others. Let me just end by saying that we are rich in knowledge and experience today because of this legendary insurgent diplomat. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. Just to say that Ambassador Nhlapo is an award-winning diplomat. He's one of our award winners of Ubuntu Award. And we're always grateful that those doctors didn't win to write that death certificate. Thank you very much for that. Just to say, from all those lessons Ambassador has shared with us, we're hoping that this dialogue could contribute towards that infrastructure for peace building. At this point, let me call my boss, Minister Ronald Lamula, to launch this dialogue. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Dlomo, who is our program director today, former President Thabo Mbeki and Mem Zanele Mbeki, Professor Anjina Pahad and the entire Pahad family, former ministers of the Department of International Relations and Cooperation, my predecessors, Minister Dlamini Zuma, and also former Minister Sisulu, and other former ministers present that I might not have seen. The Deputy Minister of the Department of International Relations and Cooperation, Elvin Bottas, Deputy Minister of Defense and Military Veterans, Deputy Minister Holomisa, our partners, Ambassador from Norway to South Africa, Ambassador Sietha, all ambassadors who are here, who have joined this occasion, and all other former ambassadors who have also joined us today. Esteemed guests and all officials of the department who are also here, some of them, colleagues and the media fraternity that has also joined us today. Good morning to you all, and we welcome you all to the launch of the inaugural annual Aziz Pahad Peace, Security and Human Rights Dialogue under the theme Constitutionalism as the Foundation of the Nation's Building and Social Cohesion, a reflection on 30 years of freedom, equity and justice in a post-apartheid South Africa. I am delighted to welcome you here at DERCO and to this important dialogue taking place today. As we gather here today at this moment in history, we must guard against the erosion of what the 1994 moment presented. Moreover, I believe that our generation must deepen the foundations we have inherited from the previous generation's stalwarts, such as former Deputy Minister Aziz Pahad, a true servant diplomat, known otherwise as the insurgent diplomat, as the title of his biography suggests. Aziz Pahad will be remembered together with his comrades of the decade, was a man of deep conviction and principle. He was steadfast in his belief in anti-imperialism, anti-racism, and the protection and promotion of non-racialism, genuine partnership and not paternalism, solidarity instead of unilateral enforcement, multilateralism, and genuine international cooperation. Just as we stand for peace and peaceful settlement of dispute and conflicts, we hereby give credit and notice that we were socialized to this belief in these cardinal non-negotiable principles by Aziz Pahad and his comrades, under the leadership of the then Minister, Dr. Dlamini Zuma, President Mandela, and Mbeki, and what was described as the Renaissance Coalition. In Aziz Pahad were the true progressive internationalists. All of us, including all members in the Government of National Unity, despite our different political persuasions, must pursue, as did Aziz Pahad, with deep commitment, the goal of transforming our country into a non-racial, non-sexist, and a united South Africa. With those who hold different views and perceptions, perhaps we must deepen consensus building through dialogue and negotiations. The GNU also took leave from this strong foundation when we declared in the statement of intent of the GNU, and I quote from the statement of intent, "Foreign policy will be based on human rights, constitutionalism, the national interest, solidarity, peaceful resolution of conflicts to achieve the Africa Agenda 2063, South-South and North-South and Africa cooperation, multilateralism, just and a peaceful, equitable world." Close quote. This is from the statement of intent. It is therefore shocking that the DA will argue that we are just implementing ANC policy in foreign affairs, when they have agreed to the above in the statement of intent, and it is what we continue to implement. The Government of National Unity does not supersede the Constitution. The statement of intent itself commits itself to constitutionalism. It can't be that when we implement what is in the Constitution, in the Foreign Services Act, National Interest Document, and the National Development Plan, we are served to be acting unilaterally by the Democratic Alliance. We are implementing what is in the foundational positions and policy document of our country, which has been socialized, consulted by South Africans, and adopted. And that is what the Department of International Relations and Cooperation and the President of the Republic of South Africa continues to implement. Until we are told otherwise by South Africans, this is the path we will continue on. The foundational elements of redress are powerful, articulated in the preamble of the Constitution, where the spirit of justice resonates through its founding principles, and the human rights framework of the Bill of Rights. As a sovereign state, we will continue to pursue the transformative objective as recently outlined in the Bella Act, the National Health Insurance Act, and the Expropriation Act. The preamble not only serves as a guiding beacon for our quest for restitution, but also embodies a new set of values and a commitment to building an inclusive South African society, one that honors the dignity and the aspirations of every individual. We must not fall for the simplistic idea that after 6 electoral cycles, we should abandon the premise that we have inherited 2 nations in one. One was white and prosperous, and the other was black, stratified along tribal lines without any economic agenda. This is a quest we need to change in this constitutional epoch. Organizations like the AfroForum and their ilk, who pursue a different path to that of our constitution, do not only stand against the reconstruction of a new South Africa, they also stand against the will of the people. Ladies and gentlemen, it is not just to our constitution that we should remain unwaveringly committed. We should also own the African constitutional normative values and architecture, from the Constitutive Act of the African Union to the AU, the NEPAD framework, and the African peer review mechanisms, the Africa Peace and Security Architecture, and the African Governance Architecture. Aziz Pahad will have expected nothing less from us. During the transition phase that set the contours of the new democratic South Africa, many of our leaders played an instrumental role in conflict resolution, mediation, and negotiation, the country's post-apartheid future, but they simultaneously played this role in the continent and further internationally. This was the legacy of those negotiations, which was both a learning experience for all involved and a human experience in building trust and confidence. Our generation can only learn and imbibe from this historic wisdom. Aziz Gulman Hussein Pahad was part of that legacy. Deputy Minister Pahad was a dedicated Democrat who fought for freedom as a stalwart of an anti-apartheid movement in exile. He was a sharp thinker, a deceptively fierce debater that could disarm you with that infectious smile, a careful listener and a radical warrior for justice, but also a pragmatic negotiator. A stalwart of the global anti-apartheid movement, his name is easily recognized and mentioned amongst the global anti-apartheid activists. As the longest-serving Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs in a democratic South Africa, Aziz Pahad played a very active role in South Africa's mediation efforts and confidence-building measures under the SPICE process, when the Israel-Palestine peace process was navigating its way through the post-assassination period of Yitzhak Rabin. More importantly, in Africa, Aziz Pahad played an active role in the negotiations with the warring factions of the Democratic Republic of Congo, Burundi, and Angola. He always understood that resolution should be pursued through dialogue. As the South African government, we welcome the decision of SAMI DRC, or SADC, to withdraw SAMI DRC from the Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo, which will give space to a confidence-building measures for a ceasefire for a long-lasting peaceful resolution in the Eastern DRC. We're also pleased that the process is now being operationalized through the process of ceasefire engagements by the chiefs of the defense forces that will lead to the reopening of the Goma airport, as agreed upon by the chiefs of the defense forces with the M23. This will enable SAMI DRC to carry its equipments from the Goma airport, because it will have been difficult for them to carry some of these equipments through other areas. According to the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute, there were active armed conflicts in at least 46 states in 2021 and in 2024, of which 18 were in sub-Saharan Africa. These statistics clearly reflect that there are too many areas of conflicts around the world, and Africa has got its own fair share of these conflicts, which mostly certainly do not contribute to stability, human security, and economic growth. South Africa is and remains a strong proponent of a peaceful dialogue to end conflicts. And this is a foundation and values that were strongly led by Aziz Pahad. In his speech delivered in Greece in 2006, titled Conflict in the 21st Century in Africa, Deputy Minister Pahad said, and I quote, "Globalization has brought the world closer, yet we are still incapable of living at peace with ourselves. with each other and unwilling to eradicate the scandal of global poverty and hunger." Close quote. This powerful observation is even more relevant today as we navigate the conflicts on our continent and the attempted shifts towards unipolarity, nationalism over multipolarity, and entrenching diversity. The global governance system stacked against Africa and the global south was a major priority of Aziz Pahad, and ensuring the transformation of this opaque system was a key concern for him. As a result, multilateralism is part of the DNA of foreign affairs of South Africa. We can't change it even ourselves, even if we want to. But that the UN and its agencies and the UN Security Council has to be transformed is not even a debate. It simply has to happen. The primary objective of this annual Peace, Security and Human Rights Dialogue is to bring together participants to share knowledge and experiences and encourage collective reflection on the requirements for building sustainable peace and advancing post-conflict reconstruction and development processes worldwide. One of Aziz Pahad's preoccupations was the abuse of power by the powerful states who believed that might makes right, and he was determined to constantly and consistently analyze the global balance of forces. He was meticulous in analyzing the war of terror after the September 2001 attacks of the US. He was just as distraught about the new scramble for Africa under the guise of Africa Rise, which he regarded as a cover for mineral extraction in Africa. For us honored guests, the issue of Africa's critical minerals will be on the agenda of the G20, and will have to be as vigilant as Aziz Pahad was when he analyzed the new scramble for Africa. Aziz Pahad played a crucial envoy role in Iraq, and his commitment to self-determination of the Palestinian and the people of Western Sahara was indispensable. It is against this background that South Africa insisted on value-add at source and beneficiation and investment for the industrialization in our continent at FOCAC recently, and our recent engagement with the AU. We will continue in this trajectory in our trade engagements, so that Africa should benefit in its own natural resources. We continue to value our mutual beneficial trade relations with the USA, and we continue to extend a hand to bridge our recently challenging relationship with South Africa. I know that there is a yearning from some amongst us that for us to show that we are courageous, we should be trading insult with other countries, ignoring all the firm and courageous positions that this country has taken on progressive internationalism. We are practicing diplomacy. We are not in the business of trading insults with anyone in the world. We will remain firm on our principled positions. We will continue to pursue our national interests in line with diplomatic decorum. If we disagree with any country, it should be on the basis of substance and not on the basis of insults. In recognition of the contributions and groundbreaking work of the late former Deputy Minister Aziz Pahad, the former chairperson of the Forum of the former South African ambassadors, I'm pleased to officially launch the annual Aziz Pahad Peace, Security and Human Rights Dialogue. Our non-aligned posture, Aziz Pahad insisted, had to be consistently re-cemented and NAM had to be re-strengthened. This is especially true in the year of the 8th-year anniversary of the non-alignment movement. It is against this background that we today, as the Department of International Relations, on behalf of the government of the Republic of South Africa, and also on behalf of President Cyril Ramaphosa, we launch this dialogue. We are hopeful that different views will contend, it will be robust, and we will get insights in terms of mediation and other matters. During the private engagements, I said to former President Mbeki, we know that him being here and during his robust engagements, in some of the inputs, they will put us in trouble. But it is our life to handle them and to deal with this. And we are hopeful that this dialogue will launch such robust engagements and help and propel the country to move forward. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. With that being said, done with the launch part of the dialogue, I now have the privilege and the honor to call to the stage our former President Mbeki to address this gathering. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Minister. I'm glad you've gave me the permission to be robust. But thanks a lot, Minister, Ambassador Angela. And thanks a lot to you, Minister, and to Welile for the salutations which you've done. I shan't repeat them. But thanks indeed to everybody for coming this morning. And thanks to Derko, to you, Minister, and Department of International Relations and Cooperation for the initiative to name this dialogue series after Aziz Pahad. I'm very, very glad indeed that we decided to honor him in this particular way. If we take our three administrations of 1994, 99, and 2004, those three administrations, I'm sure Ngwazana will agree with me that the one person in terms of those administrations was most experienced in international relations was Aziz. He was indeed, in a sense, the expert on whom we depended for guidance with regard to these issues. I'm very glad also that we've decided to say something at this meeting about his book, The Insurgent Diplomat, because that tells a particular story, which is important. All of us will recall that the U.S., supported particularly by the United Kingdom, went to war against Iraq in 2003. We were very, very interested to stop that war before it broke out. So part of what happened is that Aziz had to engage Saddam Hussein on the issue of his cooperation, the cooperation of Iraq with the UN arms inspectors who were led by the Swede Hans Blix. Because it was clear to us, watching at a distance, that not enough of that was happening, that cooperation. And indeed, Hans Blix was talking publicly about that. And to avoid this war, to avoid a war that would be caused by that, Aziz engaged the then president, Saddam Hussein, to convince him about the importance of cooperating with the UN and indeed dealing with that challenge, which related to weapons of mass destruction. And Saddam agreed. As a consequence of which, Aziz led a delegation to Iraq of the people in this country who had been responsible for dismantling our own nuclear weapons, and were also very, very familiar with what had happened with regard to the chemical and biological weapons. He led a delegation to go to Iraq to engage the Iraqis on this matter, whether they owned weapons of mass destruction. That delegation of Aziz Pahad wrote a report and said, in fact, there were no weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. And that report was submitted to the UN Security Council. When the President George Bush at some point called me to say that he was very, very concerned about the possibility of this war and wanted to avoid it if he could, I said to him, there is a report at the Security Council which says there are no weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. And he should please access that report. I don't know if he did. But I'm telling you this story because just as an indication of the kind of serious engagements in which Aziz would get involved. And of course, as all of us know, when the war broke out and the search started for these weapons of mass destruction, and the result confirmed what Aziz and his team had said. There were no weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. I'm mentioning also the Insurgent Diplomatic book, because one of the things that it deals with is a period of 4 years which was focused on preparing for the transition from apartheid to democracy, in which Aziz was involved. The group of leading Afrikaners, academics, business people, leaders in the church, professionals, who I could say had undertook a voyage of discovery. It was to talk to the ANC, really to find out what is the ANC. What does it think? What is its view about the future of South Africa and all of that? They had to discover this because they had brought themselves up on a fake notion of what the ANC was. Aziz engaged in this discussion for 4 years, and they would ask questions like, when we say the people shall govern, what do we mean? Because in their understanding, we meant the ANC shall govern. That there would be an election, one election, the ANC would win and stay in power forever. So we had to explain all of this. We had to explain when we say South Africa belongs to all who live in it, black and white. After all of these centuries of oppression by a white minority, what do we mean? Aziz was part of the process of explaining what that meant and what it would mean once South Africa was liberated. I'm saying all of this because I'm quite sure that Aziz would have been very shocked when he read this executive order, which was issued on the 7th of February by the President of the United States, which will recall what it said, that in shocking disregard of the citizens' right, the Republic of South Africa recently enacted the Expropriation Act to enable the government of South Africa to seize ethnic minority Afrikaners' agricultural property without compensation. And it said this act follows countless government policies designed to dismantle equal opportunity in employment, education, and business, and hateful rhetoric and government actions fueling disproportionate violence against racially disfavored landowners. I'm saying Aziz would have been shocked to listen to that because he'd spent so many years explaining what the ANC stood for and what it would mean for South Africa, what that would mean for South Africa when South Africa was liberated. That you could have a false statement like this actually propagated. But also Aziz would have treated that as a wake-up call. in this sense, that it indicated that it was as an imperative correctly to understand the world in which we engage foreign policy and international relations. To understand how any government could so readily accept a falsehood of that kind. To understand the world in which we engage in foreign policy and international relations. And therefore, Minister, on behalf of Aziz, let me ask some robust questions. Does DERCO understand the world in which it engages international relations for the people of South Africa? Does it have the internal capacity to develop this understanding? And in practice, what is done practically to get this understanding? Maybe Ambassador Loma, this is your responsibility. And what is done to relate policy to that understanding? I think these are very serious questions which Aziz would have raised, so that whatever we do, it's on a basis of a proper an objective understanding, an understanding of the objective world within which policy develops, which might have explained why a falsehood like this claim about the persecution of Afrikaners, how that was accepted by an important government in the world. In this context, in that context of understanding the world, let me make some remarks about the United States. Earlier this month of March, the U.S. issued its annual threat assessment of the U.S. intelligence community. And it's important to study and understand this because as part of the need of understanding the objective world within which we operate. And the U.S. intelligence threat assessment. And among others, it has a section headed Major State Actors. And it says several major state actors present, proximate, and enduring threats to the United States and its interests in the world, challenging U.S. military and economic strength regionally and globally. China stands out as the actor most capable of threatening U.S. interests globally, though it is also more cautious than Russia, Iran, and North Korea about risking its economic and diplomatic image in the world by being too aggressive and disruptive. And growing cooperation among these actors expands the threat, increasing the risk that should hostilities with one occur, it may draw in others, unquote. This is assessment of the U.S. intelligence community about major state actors. That report also contains a section dealing with what is called transnational Islamic extremists. And it says, ISIS's most aggressive branches, including ISIS Khorasan and its entrepreneurial portals, will continue to seek to attack the West, including the United States, via online outreach and propaganda aimed at directing, enabling, or inspiring attacks, and could exploit vulnerable travel routes. It says in 2024, the ISIS spokesperson publicly hailed the group's Africa expansion, highlighting the growing importance of the continent to the group. ISIS Somalia has doubled in size during the past year. ISIS West Africa remains the largest branch and leads in numbers of claimed attacks, and ISIS Sahel is expanding into coastal West Africa. Then says Al-Qaeda maintains its intent to target the United States and US citizens across its global affiliates. And Al-Shabaab, Al-Qaeda's largest and wealthiest affiliate, remains focused on attacks in Somalia that further its regional objectives, provides funding to Al-Qaeda efforts outside of Somalia, unquote. I think the legitimate question that arises from these quotations is what are the implications for Africa of these assessments concerning major state actors and concerning transnational Islamic extremists, as the US intelligence report says. So far, of course, there is no Africa policy from the Trump administration. But in December 2018, which policy would have informed us about whether these assessments, intelligence assessment, have an impact in terms of US policy towards Africa? So I'm saying so far there isn't such a policy. But in December 2018, that's during President Trump's first term, Ambassador John Bolton, who was the national security advisor to President Trump, spoke about the Trump administration's new Africa strategy. And here's what he said. He said, we have prioritized everything, developing this new Africa strategy document, because we understand that lasting stability, prosperity, independence, and security on the African continent are in the national security interest of the United States. And he said, we want our economic partners in the region to thrive, to prosper, and control their own destinies. And he said, in America's economic dealings, we ask only for reciprocity, never for subservience. And second, countering the threat from radical Islamic terrorism and violent conflict. And he went on to say, great power competitors, namely China and Russia, are rapidly expanding their financial and political influence across Africa. They are deliberately and aggressively targeting their investments in the region to gain a competitive advantage over the United States. China uses bribes, opaque agreements, and the strategic use of debt to hold states in Africa captive to Beijing's wishes and demands, and continued that its investment ventures are riddled with corruption and do not meet the same environmental or ethical standards as US developmental programs. And he went on to say that Russia, for its part, is also seeking to increase its influence in the region through corrupt economic dealings. And across the continent, Russia advances its political and economic relationships with little regard for the rule of law or accountable and transparent governance. It continues to sell arms and energy in exchange for votes at the United Nations, votes that keep strong men in power, undermine peace and security, and run counter to the best interests of the African people. In short, the predatory practices pursued by China and Russia stunt economic growth in Africa, threaten the financial independence of African states, inhibit opportunities for US investment, interfere with US military operations, and pose a significant threat to US national security interests. And equally concerning at this time, he says, the lack of economic progress in the region has accompanied the proliferation of radical Islamic terrorism and other forms of violent conflict across Africa. Countering these serious threats is the second priority under our new Africa strategy. And he says we'll focus our economic efforts on African governments that act with us as strategic partners and which are striving towards improved governance and transparent business practices. As our partner nations develop economically, they will be better prepared to address a range of security threats, including terrorism and militant violence, unquote. Minister, we do not know whether the current Trump administration will persist with these positions concerning what it has described as its strategic adversaries, according to its threat assessment. I've read this thing because it may very well be that they may take, the current administration may take what John Bolton said on behalf of the first Trump administration as a framework within which to formulate its Africa policies. If that is the case, Minister, the question arises, what does Africa do in the light of that? In 2022, the U.S. Defense Intelligence Agency said that terrorism remains an active, destabilizing influence, with Al-Qaeda's affiliated terrorist groups and ISIS gaining influence, and in many cases territorial control in the Sahel, in Mozambique, in Nigeria, in Somalia, and elsewhere on the continent. It said the Al-Qaeda affiliated group Jamaat Nusrat al-Islam wal Musliman continues to increase attacks in Sahelian states, especially Burkina Faso and Mali, and to threaten littoral states. While ISIS Sahel is focused on rebuilding itself in Niger after leadership losses and attacks in 2020 and 2021, ISIS West Africa mostly defeated Boko Haram in 2021, incorporating many former Boko Haram fighters in the process, and allowing the group to expand its area of influence and continued attacks on regional security forces in the Lake Chad Basin. It said in Mozambique, ISIS Mozambique expanded operations, conducting deadly attacks and temporarily taking terrain that threatened Western economic interests in the oil-rich province of Cabo Delgado. And it said that in South Africa, ISIS elements have used the country as a conduit for illicit financial transactions. This situation, unquote, this situation described by the Defense Intelligence Agency of the US is not likely to have changed very much by 2025, except for the West. So the question arises, what do we do in the light, I'm talking about the continent, in the light of what Bolton said about countering the threat from radical Islamic terrorism and violent conflict, and the commitment he made that the US would intervene in Africa to achieve that objective? What do we do? Then another matter which was of importance relates to the global economy, raised in particular in the context of what the Trump administration has been saying about raising tariffs on many products. It raises a question, therefore, not only of tariffs, but the economy. In terms of the economy, global economy, what does the US, the Trump administration think? Alistair Crook. Alistair Crook is a former British ambassador, belongs to a group called the Conflicts Forum. And in this regard, talking about the economy, he makes an interesting proposition. And he writes that the post-World War II geopolitical outcome effectively determined the post-war global economic structure. And says both are now undergoing huge change. And he says the US has been forced into two major conclusions. First, that the budget deficit coupled with exploding federal debt finally has turned the resource curse back onto the United States. As the keeper of the global reserve currency, it has necessarily made America's primordial export to become the US dollar. And by extension, it means that the strong dollar, buoyed by a global synthetic demand for the reserve currency, has eviscerated America's real economy, its manufacturing base. And he says this is the Dutch disease, whereby currency appreciation suppresses the development of productive export sectors. And the dollar's global role contributed to the financialization at the expense of investment in the real economy. And says that the reserve currency, and consequently the strong dollar, has pushed, which is very interesting, has pushed many US military supply lines out to China. And he said, the Pentagon says it makes no sense for the US to depend on Chinese supply lines to provide the inputs to US military manufactured weapons. And the US administration has two answers to this conundrum. It's to weaken the value of the dollar and therefore to increase the value of the partners' status currencies. And he says the US solution is to force the rest of the world to appreciate their currencies in order to improve the US export competitiveness. And he says the second option is a unilateral approach. In this approach, a user fee on foreign official holdings of US treasuries would be imposed to drive the reserve managers out of the dollar and thus weaken it. And he says a US economic rebalancing is coming. And says Putin is right. The post-World War II economic order is gone. This analysis may be right or wrong, but I think the size of the issues it's raising concerning a country which can make still a major impact on the global economy are very important, and therefore emphasizing the need to understand the global economic objectives of the Trump administration. Alistair Crook said that Putin was right. The old economic order was on the way out, creating new possibilities. And he talks about what Putin said earlier this month when he addressed the Russian Union of Industrialists and Entrepreneurs. He was talking about Russia in the context of this economic world order that is on its way out. He said sanctions are neither temporary nor targeted measures. They constitute a mechanism of systemic strategic pressure against our nation. Regardless of global developments or shifts in the international order, our competitors will perpetually seek to constrain Russia and diminish its economic and technological capacities. And this, as I reiterate, sanctions and restrictions are the reality of the existing new stage of development that the entire world, the entire global economy has entered. The global competitive struggle has intensified, assuming increasingly sophisticated and uncompromising forms. But the so-called Western dominance is slipping away, and new global growth centers taking the center stage is a long-term trend. And I want to emphasize that. Yes, of course, we are fully aware of the advantages offered by our so-called Western partners, such as advanced technology and production process organization. We should keep in mind that growth rates in various regions of the world will remain stable over the next several decades. And the fact that we have, to a certain extent, refocused our priorities, not through our fault, by the way, due to a number of circumstances, may be a good thing. We are shifting our focus to global promising markets. All things that we need, we will get one way or another. Of course, he says, this long-term trend will remain unchanged. It will be bolstered up by, among others, the BRICS development platform that is currently taking shape. What Putin is arguing here is that despite all obstacles, essentially because the old order in the economy globally no longer holds, as Alistair Crook said, Russia will succeed. What's our reading, Minister, about this? Is the world order, the old order, the economic order, on the way out? Is Putin and Alistair Crook, are they correct? And where does that position us and position the African continent, if that in fact is a reality? Some have correctly suggested that despite this changing world, it is still necessary to make an objective assessment of the power of the United States, given its prominent economic, technological, and military standing globally. And in this regard, a US professor, Paul Post, wrote in January this year and said that some might question whether the US is still the world's hegemonic power or the key country that can shape and alter the course of international politics. If it's not, then Trump's behavior, while concerning, can be dismissed as the flailing of a declining power. But even if the US is still not hegemonic, much of the world, be it nations of the Western Hemisphere, residing directly in the US orbit, the network of allies that rely on US protection or international institutions that rely on US support to function still view the US as a central actor in the world. Moreover, the US remains one of the few countries in the world with the power and resources largely to shape world politics in a manner that serves its interests. It would seem to be a wasted opportunity not to, unquote. The US professor Paul Post said this early this year. It was followed by another US thinker, Connor Eccles, who wrote under the heading, Trump's Power Problem, and said whether Trump likes it or not, this is now Connor Eccles, whether Trump likes it or not, the unipolar movement, that brief post-Cold War period of true American primacy, is over, particularly in economic terms, and Washington's leverage is an easy resource to squander. Trump can get modest short-term wins by threatening sudden economic shocks. But over the long term, countries will try to limit their exposure to a volatile trading partner. And he said for most of the post-World War II era, America has used its status as a dominant global economic power to shape the rules of trade and hem in its adversaries. That power is still huge. But preserving it depends on a certain level of restraint, especially given all the other powerful states in the game today. The more that Washington hits other countries with sanctions or tariffs, the more it encourages other states to find ways to cut their ties to the American economy. And he says Washington's economic sword, once the world's sharpest, is growing dull through 1,000 mindless blows, unquote. Professor Paul Post himself concludes that the US under Trump appears bent on fully leveraging its outsized position within the world's trade, security, and financial networks to coerce better deals. If others don't like it, they won't even be given the dignity of a kind word. The US, in Trump's view, has been played for a sucker and is determined to change all that. And he says Trump also strives in being highly transactional. And this will tilt the US towards being more a predatory hegemon in the coming years, one that destabilizes and disturbs more than it comforts. But it also won't be fully outside the bounds of how the US was long perceived by others, unquote. And South Africa itself, of course, has been exposed to some action by the Trump administration. The challenge remains. With all these various assessments of what the Trump administration stands for, how should we relate to the US under the Trump administration? In my view, not a very straightforward matter, but I believe that in this regard, DECO must give us the lead. As Aziz insisted, we are seeing the emergence of a multipolar world to which Anjana here referred. The issues we've been discussing are part of that multipolarity. And many were surprised when the new US Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, said during an interview on the 30th of January this year, and I quote, "So it's not normal for the world to simply have a unipolar power. That was an anomaly. It was a product of the end of the Cold War, but eventually you are going to reach back to a point, where you had a multipolar world, multi-great powers in different parts of the planet." He said, "We face that now with China and to some extent Russia, and then you have rogue states like Iran and North Korea that you have to deal with," unquote. In the same interview, he said that the way the world has always worked is that the Chinese will do what's in the best interest of China. The Russians will do what's in the best interest of Russia. The Chileans are going to do what is in the best interest of Chile. And the United States needs to do what's in the best interest of the United States, unquote. It seems right, Minister, that inspired by what Marco Rubio said, we must also insist that Africa must do what is in the best interest of Africa. It is obvious that an important part of what is in the best interest of Africa is its correct and timely positioning in the evolving multipolar world, so that the emerging global order places our continent in a better position to address its many challenges of the eradication of poverty and underdevelopment, of silencing the guns, of ensuring that the people govern and ending Africa's international marginalization. The serious challenge in this regard is that there is no evidence or sign anywhere that Africa's political and intellectual leadership is not only conscious of the need to define our continent's place in the emerging multipolar world, but is ready to act on this urgent matter. Given his performance, recent performance with regard to many of Africa's contemporary challenges, it is very, very doubtful that the continental body, the African Union, would be up to this task. This problem is compounded by reality that over the years, the spirit of Pan-Africanism among our African political leadership in general has waned significantly, such that, to borrow a favorite Aziz expression, very few among these eat, sleep, and dream, while at the same time focusing on addressing the historic task of achieving Africa's Renaissance. It would therefore be very opposite that as ZERCO is engaged in this inaugural process of honoring a giant thinker and practitioner in the field of international relations, Aziz Pahad, it should resolve to lead the process whereby our country, a member state of the African Union, would present to the AU a concrete program Africa should follow, practically to define and find its rightful place in the emerging multipolar world. Thus, at last, would Aziz's dream be realized of ensuring that Africa interacts with the rest of the world as an equal among equals. I'm suggesting, Minister, that DERCO faces all these challenges as it understands precisely this world in which we live, to elaborate its policies so that the African continent engages its matters in a way that produces its results, positioned correctly in that multipolar world. And I really apologize that I did not have to, on your programs, it says, this keynote address must discuss the role of constitutional development in the South African nation building and social cohesion process and the role it plays in foreign policy. I apologize that I did not have time to address this topic on our program about the role of constitutional development and so on. It must be addressed at some point. And in that regard, I'd like to say, more is nog 'n dag. Baie dankie.
Mr. President Thabo Mbeki, thank you very much for those lessons. And you've taught us that let's not concentrate so much in the past, but let's deal with the future. Let's also deal with the present. And you've outlined what those are, which we're grappling with. But I'm sure Minister will say that DECO cannot do it alone. We do it in partnership with all the stakeholders and all the partners. So we're looking forward. But I think the direction and the directive is clear. How, as Africa, are we going to deal with what's going on right now? How are we going to shape the future? Thank you very much, His Excellency. At this point, we've got a young person who's going to tell us what he thinks the future will look like, based on his reading of Aziz Pahad's book. I've got Senulo Rampatla. Where is he? There's the young person who's our intern. Thank you.
Former President, His Excellency Thabo Mbeki, former First Lady of South Africa, Ms. Mbeki, Minister Ronald Lamola, and Deputy Minister Alvin Bottas, former ministers, Your Excellencies, ambassadors and high commissioners, members of the diplomatic corps, Professor Anjina Parek Pahad and the Pahad family, esteemed guests, program director, fellow colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. In my journey as a young and aspiring diplomat in the service, I noticed and began to draw parallels and similarities between the words and utterances of former Deputy Minister Pahad and today's arduous and difficult geopolitical environment. I paused, and taking this environment into consideration, as the youth, we are looking upon our leaders, both past and present, to provide guidance and wisdom for us, the future leaders. I'll be reading an extract from former Deputy Minister Pahad's book, Insurgent Diplomat, which was published in 2014 and is a memoir which covers his life from the fight of the liberation of South Africa to his journey as Deputy Foreign Minister. I'll be reading verbatim from the book's preface and will be closing with the book's postscript. In the preface, former Deputy Minister Pahad outlined the injustices of the past and how these have contributed to some of the ills still seen in today's society, and the strides that have been taken in the pursuit of redress. In the postscript, he covers the country's transition to democracy and his subsequent service to the Republic. Since 1994, South Africans have, against all odds, achieved many impressive successes in strategic areas of public policy that address the deprivations and scourges of our apartheid past. The record of such achievements can be seen in areas such as education, healthcare, housing, labor law, welfare and social services, and in the general improvement of quality of life for millions of ordinary South Africans. However, South Africa still faces a litany of challenges. We continue to experience major deficits and shortcomings in the lack of progressive leadership at every level of society, and there is a distinct lack of human and institutional capacity to deliver on the ambition of addressing the hard legacies of poverty, unemployment, and inequality, as well as the growing disparities between the haves and the have-nots. From the preface, we see that there are many achievements. However, challenges remain. Moving on to the book's postscript, in his final reflections as Deputy Minister, Pahad writes, "The awarding of the joint Nobel Peace Prize to Nelson Mandela and F.W. de Klerk symbolized a victory for the negotiated settlement as the genesis of a new democratic dispensation. After Nelson Mandela formed the Government of National Unity in 1994, on the basis of the negotiated settlement, I was honored to be appointed as Deputy Foreign Minister, a position I held until 2008. This gave me the opportunity to become closely involved in the realignment of South Africa's foreign policy and international relations, as well as our reintegration into the Committee of Nations. South Africa's transition to democracy represented the culmination of one stage of my life as an insurgent diplomat and the beginning of another at the hard coalface of international relations and global politics. My life in the ANC and the SACP straddled the worlds of progressive activism and the difficult art of negotiation. Within the boundaries of human frailties, I tried to stay committed to the essential principles and practices that underpinned our struggle for liberation in South Africa. And when President Mandela took the oath of office at the Union Buildings in Pretoria on that sunny afternoon in May of 1994, he embodied a new social contract with the people of South Africa. Pahad reiterates, "In this book, I've attempted to demonstrate the resilient power of dialogue and the necessity of building trust and confidence with our adversaries. If we did not pursue the path of negotiations with ingenuity and flexibility, the ingredients of a potent brew of civil conflict would have been all too palpable and real. Ours was a historic task because, after all, we were involved in changing the very foundations of an apartheid state that drew its logic from racial divisions and group identity, where a minority had absolute control of the state and where white interests prevailed over those of the majority of South Africans. Moreover, the end of the Cold War added another catalytic dimension to South Africa's transition into democracy and exposed the spurious illusions of a communist threat. A triumphant ANC had thus emerged from the trenches of liberation to govern an extremely complex society with formidable social and economic challenges. We have been able to revolutionize the South African polity, but transforming its society and economy remain persistent challenges, as liberation movements elsewhere in our region have discovered. The country has made great strides in consolidating the benefits of democracy with a strong focus on people-centered growth and development. But there are many morbid symptoms that conspire against our ability to address the deeply embedded legacies of poverty, unemployment, and inequality. Former Deputy Minister Pahad describes how the then Deputy President Thabo Mbeki spoke cogently in Parliament in 1998 about South Africa representing a country of two nations, one white and prosperous, and the other black and poor. He argued very forcefully that until we confront the divisive and debilitating forces of these two nations, it will be difficult to promote reconciliation, a new patriotism, and a new common agenda. This is a key requirement, not only for sustaining our hard-won democratic freedoms, but also for ensuring that real and tangible social and economic benefits flow to the majority of South Africa's citizens. History is replete with the tragic consequences of progressive political parties that failed to respond to the needs and demands of ordinary people. Former Deputy Minister Pahad further stated that, ultimately, we are servants of the people and we must be honest and sincere in the face of our manifest failures as stewards of this country's democracy. Our core values must include an acknowledgement that our destiny is inextricably interwoven with that of the African continent and its people. A progressive Pan-Africanism is called for to combat the divisive forces of imperialism that continue to impede our larger endeavor of integration. Former Deputy Minister Pahad concludes his book with a famous quote from President Nelson Mandela's inauguration by saying, "Never and never again shall it be that this beautiful land will again experience the oppression of one by another and suffer the indignity of being the skunk of the world. Let freedom reign. The sun shall never set on so a glorious human achievement." Now, although the book was published over 10 years ago, and these quotations being over 30 years old, a significant number of these utterances can still be seen and reflected in recent events. In closing, as a member of today's youth, I appreciate living in a democratic society, which was achieved through the strenuous efforts of those who came before us to ensure future generations, such as mine, are afforded equal opportunities and freedom. I take it upon myself to reflect on the journey that South Africa has taken towards democracy and how the foundation of this democracy is rooted on the values of equality, equity, inclusion, integration, solidarity, and unity. And as I stand here and reflect, I see these ideals coming through from the inscriptions within the pages of the book by former Deputy Minister Aziz Pahad, it is our duty to continue the legacy of Deputy Minister Pahad and to strive for a prosperous future. Thank you.
Woo-hoo. The youth is in the house and they can see the way forward, inspired by our leaders. The colleagues who had said they would be showing up some photos of Aziz. Are you? Okay, this is it. We'll just take a few moments just to make sure that we reflect on the history as represented there visually. Okay. I've been instructed that it's 9 minutes long. Perhaps Excellencies would like to have lunch now. But the question which comes when you see the rich history and the tapestry which makes up the Pahad's involvement and leadership, we ask the question, Vavas ye, yeah? And if you were not there at the time, this is the opportunity. The president, the former president, has laid it out about what we're dealing with and that we've got work to do in terms of reflecting where we are and how we're going to go forward. The young people told us that he's ready. They are ready as the youth to take on and go forward. Our minister has said, we are diplomats. We're going to manage this, and we'll do it so nicely. We're not going to be insulting anybody. Before DM comes in to thank everyone, I want to thank my team who have worked very hard to making sure that this happens. I can see Ambassador Maestri there and Madame Chiriro Munjerere and the whole team. And we've been harassing the Thabo Mbeki Institute many times. So thank you to them and for Madame as well to allow us to do this. But that I've got my leader here to make the formal thank you and gratitude. Thank you.
Your Excellency, President Mbeki and Mrs. Mbeki, Honorable Minister of the Department of International Relations and Cooperation, Minister Lamola, the former African Union Commission Chairperson and former Minister of Durko, Dr. Dlamini Zuma, former Minister of Durko and patron of the Sisulu Foundation for Social Justice, Mrs. Sisulu, former Minister of Public Administration and Service, and Chairperson of the Thabo Mbeki Foundation, Dr. Fraser Moloketi, member of the National Executive and Deputy Minister of Defense and Military Veterans, Honorable Olamisa, Professor Parek Pahad and Mrs. Matt Pahad, Ambassador Siate, the head of mission of the Kingdom of Norway in South Africa, Ambassador Uncle Welilen Slapo, the recipient of the Ubuntu Oliver Tambo Lifetime Achievement Awards, Excellencies, Heads of Missions, stalwarts and esteemed guests, Mr. Rapatla, aspirant member of the South African Foreign Service, Minister Lamola said I must indicate to you that you have an appointment with the future. Excellency, President Mbeki, thank you very much for your crucial, thought-provoking, and insightful keynote address, always foregrounding your Pan-Africanist outlook. We have taken note of your instruction to make a thorough analysis of the global balance of power, looking at the consequent impact of political economy, and to further dissect the role of both state and non-state actors in that regard. President Mbeki, you have further reminded us of the fact that the achievement of a multipolar world and the deepening of multilateralism is not necessarily reconcilable with the aspirations of some of the big powers. President Mbeki further wished to remind you that the late President of the Republic of Namibia, Dr. Geingob, in 2022, on the occasion of his birthday message to you, promised that when he retired, he will join hands with you to revive the Pan-Africanist Renaissance movement on the African continent. That unfortunately intervened in realizing Dr. Geingob's promise, but in his honor and in treasuring the ideals of Aziz Pahad, we, as a different generation under the stewardship of Minister Lamola, commit to work with you to achieve the ideals of Pan-Africanism, of which the African peace and security architecture is an integral aspect. A very special word of gratitude to the Pahad family, in particular to Comrade Aziz's wife, Professor Anjina Parek Pahad, for allowing us to recognize the legacy of our former Deputy Minister through these engagements. We further wish to acknowledge Mrs. Matt Pahad for the contribution, ladies and gentlemen, of the broader Pahad families. Thank you, Ambassador Welilen Slapo, for the tribute and inspiring words you shared. You indicated in your testimonial that you are honored to be alive and to render the tribute. As a different generation, it is our honor to walk in your footsteps. Finally, a special appreciation to Ambassador Seita and the Embassy of Norway for your continued support in this and other initiatives that foreground the centrality of peace diplomacy in our work. As I conclude, ladies and gentlemen, at the address on the occasion of the funeral of Oliver Tambo on 2nd May 1993, Nelson Mandela had this to say, and I quote, "Oliver Tambo lived not because he could breathe. He lived not because blood flowed through his veins. Oliver Tambo lived because he had surrendered his very being to the people," unquote. I wish to paraphrase Madiba's eulogy to OR by concluding our econym to Aziz Pahad by stating as follows: Aziz Pahad lived not because he could breathe, nor because blood flowed through his veins. Aziz Pahad, ladies and gentlemen, lived because he surrendered his very being to the people. Ambassador Dlomo, asante sana.
Thank you very much, DM. I thought you were going to help me to do the honors here. Let me introduce the gratitude of our President, Madam Pahad. Excellent. Excellencies, thank you very much. There is a family photo outside on that side, which, if you can honor us, please. After that, the dinner is served on the outside on this area. Oh, just hold on. There seems to be an instruction. Okay. I'm told that the family photo will be in the minister's boardroom. Only the family, yeah? Okay. And then everybody is invited for the lunch outside. Thank you very much. And by the way, happy Eid Mubarak for those who are celebrating it.